Events Sharing Our Lives. This is our premiere show, and I am so pleased to welcome Don Shrammeck, who I've known for the last 5 years, and every time I see him, he just puts a joy in my heart. So I hope that you will stay and watch us. We have an hour of entertainment, of some cooking demonstration, a cartoon, book reading, and whatever we want to do. So thank you. Don, how are you today?
Well, I'm fine.
You're fine. Okay. Can you tell the audience how we've known each other? How did we meet, you and I?
Well, I was in the hospital and my daughter, I had to move from my other apartment, which had stairs. My daughter located the apartment, your apartment, to my apartment, and ground floor. So when I got out of the hospital for a month, I was beautifully pleased with my new home, and still am.
Oh, yes, I remember when your daughter came looking for a place for you to live, and we were just so happy to have you. And ever since we have known you, Don, I just have loved you, and you're just such a sweetheart of a man. And when I'm feeling down, I come to your house and see you, and you always lift me right up because you're just such a sweetheart. And I do remember the incident where you almost froze during Christmas season. Do you remember that?
Oh, yes. Yeah, it was a bad time for the furnace to go out, but you located this outfit that said they would bring it in New Year's Eve day, had to ship it in that night, and they guaranteed it we'd have a furnace for New Year's Day. They were there all day. It was below freezing. They had to keep the doors open, of course. There was no heat. But your help with electric heaters and several sport fleece outfits, and able to jump into my bed with my heating pads and blanket, I managed. The fridge worked, and I was able to eat, so we're in good shape.
You know, and I remember we were so worried that you were going to freeze to death because it was really, really cold. It was during that cold spell. We were trying to get you to move into our house. But you said, no, you'd be fine. And you were like dressed in 5 layers of clothes and had your electric blanket and everything else. And we checked on you. But it turned out okay.
Oh, we did fine.
So you're a pretty hardy guy. And Don, can you tell us about what your occupations were in your life? What you did? I know that you were a fighter pilot.
My primary occupation, I hired out when I was 21 for the railroad in the engine, as an engineer to be, and I've been there until I retired in 1980. So my railroading was just I was able to fly and railroad is what it amounts to, and I thoroughly enjoyed my occupation, which between that and flying every day off and so forth, tied right in with the Air National Guard and my combat, which started in 1942. So I have had a full life of railroading that I thoroughly enjoy. It's tough on the family because you're gone an awful lot, but and night work. But when you're home for a couple of days, it was great. Good job.
Yeah.
I liked it.
But I'm most interested in the stories you've told me about being a fighter pilot. You said that you were like 19, 20 years old, and they would shoot you over to Russia and fly you back within you raced to see who could get on United States soil first. Do you remember that? You told me that story once.
Oh yeah. Well, I was lucky enough to end up flying the P-38 which was the one that I thought was so beautiful, flying over to, that was Lend-Lease to Russia. They had the red stars and everything painted on them at that time. So the day I was 22, and I decided I wanted to fly, so I went to Butte, enlisted, and 44A, which it amounted to when I got my wings and commission. And then later, 6 months, I was in New Guinea. And then my year of combat started in P-38s, and just the usual thing, usual combat at that time in fighters, convoy cover, long-range escort, not too much dive bombing right there because we were full fuel to get to a target all the time. A 6-hour missions, 6 to 8 hour missions, but it was good.
Yeah. And how many missions did you fly?
Well, 94 combat missions.
94. That's pretty remarkable.
And 300 hours, which was at that time was a full tour. As soon as you got your 300, if you physically were able to get there, and some weren't, but most of us were, why, you had your tour in and you were headed back to the States. So everything was great. For me,
Yeah.
I was one of the good ones, and one of the lucky good ones. Let's put it that way. So.
Yeah, that you survived and that you lived to be 86 years old.
Yeah.
Isn't that wonderful? That's a wonderful thing. I want to talk about another friend of mine that this show is kind of going to be a little memorial to her, and her name is Jane Ide, and she was a very good friend of mine. She was 88 years old, kind of like she called herself a Calamity Jane. I viewed her more as being an Annie Oakley because she was such a marksman with the gun and stuff. And anyways, I just want to kind of play a tribute to her life during the show in spots if we can, and maybe show her paintings that she used to do on some of her art that she had. That's Jane Ide right there, and she was a little pistol. And this is some of her art. She loved to be out in the nature and out in the woods. She was a very beautiful woman her whole life, wore her full makeup every day, was dressed nicely. And the other half of her, she was just a little outdoors girl, nature lover, and loved to paint. She learned that from her mother. She was quite the little character. These are all her paintings. She lived in Great Falls. Her cabin was in my heart. She had a little dog named Mitzi that she adored. And her family. She loved her family very much too. And that's Jane Ide. She was supposed to be here today. But she's in heaven now, so I guess we'll wish her happiness there. So Don, now tell me about your family and your kids, especially about your daughter. I find your daughter just fascinating. Every time I've seen her or hear about her, she's up to new things. Can you talk about that?
Well, sure. Love to.
Yeah.
Yeah,
She's a beautiful woman too.
One wonderful jewel for me, and my wife of 45 years, and I are very proud of her, and her brother, who lives in Denver. But anyway, Jan is she's an outdoor girl. You're talking about this Jane Ide. Jan is, her idea of heaven was last weekend. They were on their mules, 30 miles each day, Saturday and Sunday, and the two dogs with them, And between the mule rides every weekend and lakes, there are 350 lakes in Beaverhead County. So she's in heaven all the time herself. Just in that country, beautiful from Dillon, and just she doing her thing the way she loves it.
And now tell me about your late wife too now, because I get the impression that your late wife was a kind of an elegant lady also. And how I deduct that is by looking at the furniture in your apartment. With the gold and the brass and the whites, and it's kind of a little bit, very graceful, very dignified furnishings. So, was your wife? She was very elegant too, then, wasn't she? Was that the kind of person she was?
Oh yeah, well, just full of art.
Yeah.
Herself, and just satisfied that urge to have it around, and I loved it.
Mm-hmm.
Just a case of allowing it, being allowed to have it. That's all. Yeah, you bet. I loved it.
Yeah, because the way you have the apartment is really really kind of elegant, kind of almost like walking on a cruise ship or something, and how it's done. And of course, you keep it neat as a pin and that. So
Wow.
now, tell me about your son. And your son lives in Denver, is that right?
He does now.
Yeah.
He's in the consulting business, and they fly him all around the country, week at a time, and always home at weekends. So he has, this is fourth home that he's had in Denver. Now he'd be transferred. He's in Washington, D.C. for a year or two, and Reno for a couple of years, and but they move him around. But he's probably, of course, he's 53 now. He probably is in his last. Just bought his this particular home, and he probably will stay there. I assume that he gets some choice as to whether he stays or moves, but he's doing fine and loves the work. And of course, it's all computer business, and room full at home, and most of this is done at home. So he's very content.
Yeah, that's good. And your daughter is like a graphic designer. I mean, she's working now on that ranch in Dillon, but she was a graphic designer, was she not?
Oh yes, but then she just she owned a home at Hungry Horse, and after leaving Semi-Tool, I laid off there. Why, she bought a home and in Seeley Lake, not in town, but at the edge of town. And because we've been summer appreciators of Seeley Lake from the time we bought our first boat when I was 38, and the kids were just they were learning to ski and skiing at 8 years old. Slalom, why, Seeley Lake has been a big part of our summer life. And she owned a couple of homes there and loved it because of growing up there. And so she loved it, but she sold her last home a couple of years ago there. And now very content with Dillon, with all the mountains and the lakes there. It's good.
She's got a good life. I'm going to go ahead and end this part because I'm going to start reading from my book. Okay, and Don, thank you so much for telling me about your family. I can't wait to see your daughter again because she's always doing different things and she's fun. I've never met your son, So, okay, what I'm going to do now is to start reading from my book, Supreme Love, and it's a battered woman's true story, and I'm going to read that for 15 minutes. Don, you can listen, huh?
You bet.
Okay. To all battered women, I love you and will hold you close to my heart forever. Prologue. Jesus, come get me. These were the last words my grandmother ever spoke. For 4 days she called out to her mother and father, her ex-husband's family and friends, all those who had died before her. We, her living family members, were all gathered around her, but not once did she call on any of us. Her eyes were focused upwards as if she was gazing at the many different spirits awaiting her. My 3 aunts and my mother nervously hovered around her, keeping a death vigil as she languished. Several grandchildren lingered in and out as a family nurse friend kept watch, and one son-in-law came in to say his final goodbye. She had been panicking and restless in the hospital, panting, an awful effort to breathe, yet cried out, "Mama, come get me," or "Daddy, come get me," with every forced breath out. Name after name she chanted, "Come get me, come get me, come get me," as if she were pleading with all those who had died before her. As she struggled to succumb, she became more and more anxious, and her pretty blue eyes, which were surgically altered in an eye lift 2 years before, were now glazed over as she continued to search upward as if she was trying so hard to see those who she was desperately calling. There was no calming her in her wild, panicky state, and in the hospital, Dr. Buchanan told her that she was dying. It was agonizing to watch. We brought her home to die, as was her last wish, and we never left her bedside. Morphine slowly dripping into her body, we were trying to keep her comfortable in her Riverview home that she loved. Tearfully, her worried daughters kept asking, "Mom, is there anything else you want?" Her final request was to hear the old church hymn, "In the Garden." To help her, I called the priest from Columbus Hospital, where I worked. We stood together at her bedside and solemnly sang, "As I walk with him and I talk with him, he tells me that I am his own." We then recited the Lord's Prayer as we watched her painful, anxious fight to breathe. After this, she made her last call, "Jesus, come get me." It was an amazing call to make, and it especially moved me, as she had been a woman of no outward religious belief. She had had a hard life working into her 70s as a waitress. She raised 4 children. One of them had severe handicaps and lost another in childbirth. Though married 6 times and had many live-in boyfriends over her lifetime, she never really seemed to find true happiness with any man. Immediately the struggles left her. There were no more suffering, anxiety, or cries. Eyes finally closed, she slipped into a semi-conscious state in her big white flowery bed in her all-white bedroom, with me lying beside her all night, vigilantly watching. Early that morning I was forewarned that I had better be at my job or I'd be in jeopardy of losing it. So Katie, the nurse friend of my Aunt Shelley's who took over my informal role as a family nurse, stayed with her to monitor her. Katie called me at almost 12:30 p.m. to tell me that her time was imminent. There was no blood pressure, she said, and to come now. Quickly I hung up the phone. I called out to my closest co-worker and friend that I had to go and rushed out of the Columbus Hospital Dialysis Center in Great Falls, Montana. I raced clear across town to Riverview in a matter of 5 or 6 minutes. It was as if she knew and she waited for me. As her short, shallow breath turned into small, barely audible gasps, her grief-stricken daughters and her many grandchildren and great-grandchildren gathered around her in a circle at the head and the foot of her white flowered bed. My aunts and my mother were standing both near her on both sides at the top of her white flowery bed, while the other ones were sitting or kneeling beside her at the bottom. Tears streaming down their faces, their arms clung to her and touched her for the last time. My Aunt Peggy, the oldest of the four daughters, and now the matriarch of the family, was the only one that spoke. She talked to her in a smooth, soothing, and reassuring way. She told her that it was all right to go now and not to worry about any of us anymore. Yet everyone was weeping and clutching onto each other in helpless sobs. We knew we were going to forever miss her. On December 10th, 1993, my grandmother quietly and peacefully died at 12:35 p.m. Surprisingly, she died without suffocating from the pulmonary edema that filled her lungs 4 times when she was previously hospitalized, caused by the emphysema and the congestive heart failure she had, and which made her breathing so arduous at the last. The pulmonary edema that Dr. Buchanan predicted and said would happen to her at her death did not happen. My own private prayer for her had been answered. It was that moment that would be forever emblazoned upon my mind, for at that same moment a constable had come to my workplace to serve me my divorce papers. And then we'll start part 1. Pardon me for the pages. I don't exactly have my book yet. It was supposed to be here the 1st of October. So I have to make do with this till it arrives. So I hope everybody will forgive me for that. Chapter 1, The Beginning and the Past. I met the man who would become my second husband 6 years earlier on a blind date set up by a girlfriend of mine. I was living in Lewistown, Idaho, and working at St. Mark Regional Medical Center, which was right across the street from the State College. The hospital had recruited me and promised me free further nursing education if I moved there. However, my work schedule was 12-hour day and night shifts that rotated every 2 weeks. This made it impossible to attend any class at all. Soon after I moved to Lewiston, Idaho, I suspected my son had juvenile diabetes mellitus type 1. Every night I would watch him drink several glasses of water, one right after another before bedtime. Afterwards, he would get up and go to the bathroom not once but 2 or 3 times. At breakfast, he would be starved and ask for food and eat double the amount he normally ate. What was frightening was that he was getting skinny, and on his 8-year-old frame, there wasn't much to lose. His second grade teacher called and told me he was complaining of headaches during school and that he couldn't see the blackboard very well. I took him in to see Dr. Olson, an old-time pediatrician, and right away he confirmed my fears. Immediately he started Danny on insulin twice a day, and I tested him 4 times a day for his blood sugars. It was heart-wrenching to watch him take the painful shots in his little arms and belly. His diet changed drastically, and he had to be watched closely for insulin reactions. If his blood sugar was too low, he could go into convulsions. If it was too high, he could go into a diabetic coma. My mother drove down from Great Falls, Montana to help me. She suggested we practice pricking our fingertips for blood and giving each other fake shots to help Danny get used to this. I would drop harmless saline to inject in her while she would poke her own finger. We all pretended that we had this horrible disease with him. I hated giving Danny his shots. Every time I did, I had this sick feeling inside. Danny never cried, but the finger pricks and the shots hurt. His sad, dark, and hollow eyes would follow me as I tried my best to be strong, loving, and matter-of-fact about the whole change in his life. Before going to work the long night shift, I would hold him close to me, rock him in my arms, and kiss him on his dark, downy brown head, and explain to him why he couldn't eat his favorite candy bars anymore, and why we had to be especially careful about everything he ate. I would then cheerfully leave for work, but by the time I walked in the med room to listen to the night report, I would be hanging on to those white medicine cabinet doors, sobbing so hard I couldn't speak. My son was diabetic. My son was diabetic. As a nurse, I knew entirely too much. Diabetes could lead to blindness, amputations, heart disease, kidney failure, and so many other dreadful complications that I could barely contain my grief. When I arrived home in the morning, I held my emotion in. I had to. My poor, darling, precious son didn't need to know what could be very well ahead of him. He didn't need to know how I cared for and comforted a frightened, crying 51-year-old dentist who was having his leg amputated in the morning because of the diabetes he had since he was a boy. He didn't need to know that just 2 months earlier, I had lost a close and dear patient that I had befriended and grew to love. She died from the devastating late complications of diabetes. TN was only 27 years old, blind, and on peritoneal dialysis, which required around-the-clock medical care. She lived in a nursing home in Kalispell, Montana, where I worked on my very first nursing job. Sorry about that. I will have a book in the future. Where she died in a state of status epilepticus the last 3 days of her life. She continually convulsed to death in the ICU bed at the Kalispell Regional Hospital. Metabolically, her chemistries and her lab values were so out of whack that she seized until her body gave up in extreme exhaustion. No, my son didn't need to know that out of 28 patients I cared for that night, half of them were there because of some complication or problem of diabetes. Already, I believe my son had too many hardships in his short life. It was one thing after another since he was born. A congenital birth defect, talipes equinovarus, caused his feet to curve and flex straight upwards. This required 4 corrective orthopedic surgeries when he was a toddler. 3 years later, when he was but 5 years old, a psychologist and his preschool teacher said that he had multiple learning disabilities and he was mentally retarded. He would be disabled his whole life. It seemed his trials never ended. I would ask, why, Lord, why? Danny never complained about any of it to me. He was a good, loving child who was cared for and loved by my family. We soon noticed his greatest joy seemed to be drawing. He would draw wild, futuristic, fantastic pictures, cartoon style, on the little homemade yellow star, blue moon, and black space painted desk my younger sister Jackie had built for him when he was just 2 years old. Whenever he was excited, like after attending a birthday party, he would flap his hands up and down. This endearing trait he still has. He did not start walking until well over 2 years old. Half of that time was spent in full leg casts that my mother and I soaked off every Saturday morning before his orthopedic appointments with Dr. Powers. This was done to correct his club feet, and then he was in leg braces for the second year of his life. He did not start talking either until he was well over 2 years old. That was a serious concern to me. And I will continue this story on next week. I do want to mention Dr. Powers, Dr. Tom Powers, took care of my son and saved my son from being a cripple. Danny walks to this day, and other searchers have seen him and have said that Danny is even able to walk with the kind of feet he was born with. But Dr. Powers saved him. Dr. Powers passed away just a few years ago, and I used to see him at daily mass at St. Anne's. But he was a very, very good man and a wonderful physician. Okay, we're going to go on to our premiere cartoon. Oh, I'm so glad that's over with. I thought I'd fall asleep.
Yow! I wanted to run away. I think she's going to cook now. Well, I'm up to some good food. Roar! And I don't mind getting the food for her either. I'll help you. Maybe I'll go after the studio audience or these camera operators. They do look very appetizing, don't they? I'm picking that one over there to eat. Roar! I'll get the broth ready. Roar! You can forget it. I'm not hungry now. Well, I am. Be a sweet kitty and have some milk with me. You're right. These people are too old to be tasty. They are her first audience. Be nice now. She did name her business after you. Yes, and she made me feel like a king, too. I'm just going to relax and listen to the rest of her show. I am, too, with my little lamb. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. Thank you, Don. We're so glad that you're here with us. This is going to be a great and fun show. Roar!
Hi. Since the theme of our show today is kind of on Jane-eyed and her westernism that she is, I made baked beans from a recipe, a really good recipe I have. And I want you to know that back in the frontier times, they not only had baked beans, but they would have Johnny cakes and salt pork. And that was when they came over in the wagon trains. This was the main staple of their food. So we did make some baked beans, and I'll tell you what goes in here, and Don's gonna kind of maybe pick up the stuff as we go.
Sure.
The first thing that we put in there is a 21-ounce can of baked beans, and you can show the audience. And we just use Bush's baked beans; they're the best. So you can put that in your crock pot, okay?
Sure.
And then we add a half a cup of brown sugar. Don, you can go ahead and pick that up. That's my hard brown sugar.
Hey, there's that.
Anyways, and we put a half a cup of that into our baked beans. And then we put a half a cup of ketchup. Don, go ahead and put the ketchup in there. Just what you pour out a half a cup and add that to your baked beans. And then our pepper. Got the pepper right there. And this is a really cool pepper shaker. I love this pepper shaker.
Yeah, I do too.
Have you had this one before? Have you tried this before? You turn this over, and I'll just kind of go on this recipe, and you turn that over, and you grind your own pepper from the peppercorns. Oh, this is really good.
Yeah, no,
I love this.
Love it in the restaurant.
Yeah,
I've never
yeah.
done it.
Well, you can see this is called black peppercorn grinder, and you can make your own pepper, and that's really an awesome stuff. Okay, then we have to have some sour stuff, vinegar, and you see what the vinegar is? Oh, there you go. We just put a dash of tablespoon of vinegar in there, and the Worcestershire sauce, which I did not bring, and how we always call that at home is Worcestershire sauce. We really gotta do a southern draw on that. That's our own little family joke. And then we cut up a medium onion diced.
Right.
And we put that
the good
in there.
stuff. You bet.
And you can put pork chunks or beanie weenies in there. And our family likes the beanie weenies.
Okay.
So you put this in a crock pot for 2 hours on high or 4 hours on low, and you can serve this to your family or to potlucks or to dinners. I also have another recipe that comes from my grandma Helen, and she used to always put cranberry sauce into her baked beans with the brown sugar, and that's really delicious too. So I'm inviting all the studio audience to come on up, and we'll give you a little taste of this. And you can have a recipe too. I forgot to put the napkins out here. Do you want more than that? Here you go. There's a recipe. You think the birds will have some? You hope not. That's funny. Oh, I gotta give you little beanie weenies. Oh, and I've got some pink lemonade here too. I'm sorry about that. Um, you better take that because you'll need that to quench your thirst. Just some more. Okay. Were you the strange guy making all the gestures back there? Here, I'm going to give you some pink lemonade. On the open range and with Johnny cakes, which all Johnny cakes are is pancakes. But if you ever read any like Laura Ingalls Wilder's books, there are any of the old westerns, no, they don't turn into jerky. But it was always called Johnny cakes. So Don, you better have some.
Sure.
Okay, there you go. And here's some pink lemonade.
Oh, I don't know I have one.
Oh, you have one. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, and then I think that's about all I can tell you about the easy baked beans. And here is that recipe right here. If you'd like to write in for requests, I'll be happy to send you a copy of this recipe. And that's it. Hi, I'm Annie Oakley, and we're celebrating kind of Western days with Jane Ide. I'm sure she's just riding her broncs right up there in heaven. And I'm Annie Oakley, and I lived 150 years ago. Did you know that I was considered America's first female superstar? I was. Yes, they wrote a play about me, which I starred in called The Western Girl. Later, after my death, they made a movie about my life called Annie Oakley. And then 10 years after that, Rogers and Hammerstein created a musical called Annie Get Your Gun on Broadway. That was turned into a film, and in the 1950s, there was a TV series called Annie Oakley. But let me tell you about my life and how my fame all began. I was born to poor Quaker parents near North Star, Ohio, and I was the fifth of 7 children in 1860. My father fought in the War of 1812 and died 6 years after I was born from pneumonia and overexposure in the freezing weather. My name was actually Phoebe Ann Mosley. My mother remarried again and had another child. Her second husband died, and she put me in the county poor farm. This is where I learned how to embroider and sew, which was good because I would make all of my own costumes later. The poor farm gave me gave me away to a mean couple who I would only refer to as the Wolves for the rest of my life. I endured severe mental and physical abuse from this family. Finally, I got back to my mother's small farm and she had remarried again. I never went to school in my life. I never knew how to read or write. To help provide for my poor family, I started hunting when I was 8 years old. I grabbed my father's rifle and went into the woods and shot my first squirrel. My mother was horrified by what I had done and told me to never shoot game again. I didn't pay any mind to her, and by age 9, I was hunting all over the backwoods of Ohio. I sold all my game to the local people and was able to save up $200 to pay off my mother's small mortgage on her farm. Needless to say, I became known as a sharpshooter. When I was 21 years old, Frank Butler bet a hotel owner $100 that he could beat any fancy shooter. They set the match up for me. I was only 5 foot tall and 100 pounds, but I beat Frank Butler after 25 rounds. Frank fell in love with me and we married 5 years later after 5 years of courtship. Our marriage would last almost 50 years. We moved to Cincinnati, and that's where I changed my name for a stage name. One theory says I took on the Oakley name from the name of the neighborhood I was living in, and another theory says I took it on from my paternal grandfathers, but I'll never tell. Frank had me working as his assistant in his traveling show, but he soon realized I had more talent than he did, and I became the star, and he was my assistant and business manager. A century later, our personal and business success in handling celebrity is still considered a model show business relationship. We joined Buffalo Bill Cody's Wild West show in 1885. Fellow performer Sitting Bull nicknamed me Watanya Cecilia, which means Little Sure Shot, and they put that on all the paid advertisements in the newspapers. My aim was so good that I knocked the ashes off a cigarette held by the Crown Prince of Germany. I later said that if my aim had been a little worse, I could have averted World War I. We toured and performed in front of Queen of Victoria and other crowned heads in Europe. There was another sharpshooter female named Lillian Smith, she was my rival, and she claimed she was younger than me and could outshoot me. She was always scantily clad in clothes, while I always remained in my conservative Western dresses that I sewed myself. It was a very tense relationship, and I started deducting 6 years off my age in my rivalry with her. It got so bad that I left the show and then didn't come back on until she departed for good. My husband and I would work with Buffalo Bill Cody for the next 17 years. In 1909, I got in a train crash, which left me temporarily paralyzed and needing several spinal operations. That ended my work with Buffalo Bill. After my recovery, I starred in the play The Western Girl, then for the next few months. There was this little woman who pretended to be me and was arrested for stealing to support a cocaine habit. She was in prison, sentenced for stealing the trousers of a Negro in order to get money with which to buy cocaine. William Randolph Hearst spread it all in his newspapers that it was me that had the drug habit. I spent the next 6 years winning 54 and 55 liable lawsuits against newspapers that printed that story. However, I lost money in the legal costs of it all. William Randolph Hearst even hired a private investigator to dig up dirt about my life and to smear my reputation, and there was none. For the rest of my life, I shot up charity events to help orphans, widows, and underprivileged women. I campaigned for women's rights to hold paid employment, earn equal pay, participate in sports, and defend herself in her own home and on the city streets. I also offered to raise a regiment of women to join World War I, but the government did not answer my letter. I was going to raise the women up to go fight the war. By this time, I had taught thousands of women of how to shoot a gun. When I was 62, I was in a car accident which broke my hip and my right ankle. For the rest of my life, I had to walk with a leg brace. I still appeared at charity events and dazzled my audience with my amazing shooting abilities. What a show I'd put on for the crowds. I would throw up 6 glass balls and shoot them before they fell to the ground. I shot while looking at a mirror. I even shot playing cards, turned sideways no less, and split them in half. I was considered the premier marksman of the world. I met all kinds of famous people too. Will Rogers wrote a glowing review about me. Thomas Edison invited me and my husband to make a test movie with his new camera. I finally retired in 1913. I died in 1926 of pernicious anemia at the age of 66. Some people think I might have died of lead poisoning due to the lead in the bullets I used for years. My husband died just 18 days later. They discovered after my death that I had spent my entire fortune on charities. These are some of the medals I've won in my life: the Trap Shooting Hall of Fame, the United Nations Medal, Blue Mengingo Medal, Blue UN Medal, Bold Strike UN Medal, Broad Speech Medallion, the Blue Ribbon Soccer Medal, the Canadian Service, Canadian Gold, Conger UN Medallion, Gold Eagle on the Sun, Red Stripe UN Medallion, and my favorite medal of all was Best Woman of the World Medal. Thank you. And Don, what do you think of Annie Oakley? She sounded like a little pistol, didn't she?
Got enough money.
Huh? Was she your kind of woman? Was she your kind of woman? Was Annie Oakley your kind of woman?
Oh, I think so. Oh, yes.
She was a sharp shooter. When women did not shoot guns, they were very traditional roles of male and female. And they were in the home, and she was out there hunting game, but she provided and saved her family and her mother. Her mother had bad luck with husbands.
Oh, yeah.
All her husbands died on her.
I believe.
So we just got a couple of jokes we can tell before we end it, and end our hour with you
Sure.
to hear some funny stories. Some inspirational stories. Okay. I'm just going to read this cute little story, especially for Don, because he will laugh over this. So, and this story came from Canada, and it's kind of funny. Calling in sick to work makes me uncomfortable. No matter how legitimate my excuses, I always get the feeling that my boss thinks I'm lying. On one recent occasion, I had a valid reason but lied anyways because the truth was just too darn humiliating. I simply mentioned that I had sustained a head injury and I hoped I would feel up to coming to the next day for work. By then I reasoned I could think of a doozy to explain the bondage on the top of my head. The accident occurred mainly because I had given in to my wife's wishes to adopt a cute little kitty. Initially, the new acquisition was no problem. Then one morning, I was taking my shower after breakfast when I heard my wife, Deb, call out to me from the kitchen. Honey, the garbage disposal is dead again. Please come reset it. You know where the button is, I protested. Through the shower, pitter-patter, and steam. Reset it yourself. But I'm scared, she persisted. What if it starts going and it sucks me in? There was a meaningful pause, and then she said, come on, it'll only take you a second. So out I came, dripping wet and buck naked, hoping that my silent, outraged nudity would make a statement about how I perceived her behavior as extremely cowardly. Sighing loudly, I squatted down and stuck my head under the sink to find the button. It is this last action I remember performing. It struck without warning and without respect to my circumstances. No, it wasn't the hex disposal drawing me into its gnashing metal teeth. It was our new kitty who discovered the fascinating dangling object she spied hanging between my legs. She had been poised around the corner and stalked me as I reached under the sink, and at the precise moment when I was most vulnerable, she leapt at the toys I unwittingly offered and snagged them with her needle-like claws. I lost all rational thought to control orderly bodily movements, blindly rising at a violent rate of speed with the full weight of kitten hanging from my masculine region. Wild animals are sometimes faced with a fight or flight syndrome. Men in this predicament choose only the flight option. I know this from experience. I was fleeing straight up in the air when the sinking cabinet bluntly and forcefully impeded my ascent. The impact knocked me out cold. When I awoke, my wife and the paramedics stood over me. Now there are not many things in this life worse than finding yourself lying on the kitchen floor, buck naked, in front of a group of been there, done that paramedics. Even worse, having been fully briefed by my wife, the paramedics were all snorting loudly as they tried to conduct their work, all the while trying to suppress their hysterical laughter and not succeeding. Somehow I lived through it all. A few days later, I finally made it back in the office, where colleagues tried to coax an explanation out of me about my head injury. I kept silent, claiming it was too painful to talk about, which it was. What's the matter, they all asked. Cat got your tongue? If only they knew. Okay. Well, Don, I just want to thank you for joining me today. And I've got a little present for you. In fact, I'll give you a choice of what you would rather have. Would you like to have a little lion or a cup? What would be more useful for you?
Well, I better have that.
Okay.
Why not?
And I do thank you so much for joining me. And I just want to, maybe you'll join me again. Thank you, everyone. It's been a wonderful time having you here. I just had a good time myself. I love you, Dad. Mr.